Lewis Hamilton said it out loud after Japan. No confidence. Not in FP2, not in the race, not in the power unit that was supposed to close the gap to Mercedes. The frustration was real. It was public. And inside Maranello, it reportedly did not go down well. But here is what makes that moment interesting in hindsight. Ferrari's engine and electronics departments were already working on the answer before Hamilton finished speaking. New algorithms, a completely revised software package targeting battery management, energy harvesting and deployment strategy. The exact problems that have been slowly bleeding performance from this F26 since Melbourne. Miami is where it arrives, and the timeline to get it there is brutally tight. Subscribe to F1 Perspective, and let's break down exactly what Ferrari have been building, and what it could actually change. To understand why Ferrari's Miami software update matters, you need to understand what super clipping has actually been costing them across the first 3 races. The S26 reaches the end of straights and runs out of electrical energy before the braking zone. The MG UK, delivering 350 kilowatts of electrical output, depletes faster than the car's harvesting systems can replenish it. The result is visible on every onboard camera. The car accelerates hard out of a corner, reaches peak speed somewhere in the middle of the straight, and then visibly slows as the battery empties. Top speed is being surrendered before the braking zone begins. At Suzuka, Lando Norris put a number on the experience from inside the cockpit. A 56 km/h drop in speed on a straight where the car should be flat. That is not a minor inconvenience. That is a fundamental performance limitation that affects lap time, race pace, and the ability to defend against or attack a car running a more efficient energy cycle. Mercedes does not have this problem at the same severity. Their power unit manages the relationship between deployment and harvesting more efficiently, sustaining electrical output for longer across each straight. McLaren, as a Mercedes customer, found a way to reduce that gap significantly at Suzuka through software work done between China and Japan. Their car was visibly more competitive in Japan than it had been in the first 2 rounds. Ferrari watched that happen. They understood what it meant, and they began building their own version of the same answer for Miami. The software update Ferrari is targeting for Miami is not a minor calibration tweak. Italian journalist Paolo Filizzetti, writing in Gazzetta, described it as a profoundly revised and corrected software in terms of electric charge management, charging strategies, and the use of stored energy. The key phrase is new algorithms. Ferrari are not adjusting the parameters of the existing system. They are introducing new decision-making logic, new code that changes how the SF26 power unit thinks about the relationship between harvesting and deployment across a full lap. In practical terms, the new algorithms target 3 specific areas: battery management, the way the system decides how much energy to store versus deploy at any given point on the circuit; charging strategy, the rate and timing of energy recovery during braking and lift phases, ensuring the battery arrives at each deployment zone with more charge available; and energy deployment, the logic governing how the MG UK distributes its 350 kilowatts across a straight, extending peak output for longer before the depletion curve begins. The goal of all 3 changes is the same: give Leclerc and Hamilton the tools to avoid seeing the SF26 potential performance severely sacrificed due to super cupping. That is not paraphrased. That is the exact framing from Ferrari's own technical sources. The word severely is doing significant work in that sentence. It confirms that Ferrari's engineers believe the current software is not extracting the full performance their power unit is capable of delivering. There is more in the engine. The question is whether the new algorithms can unlock it before Miami. But to truly understand the magnitude of what Ferrari is attempting, we need to go deeper into the 2026 power unit regulations and why energy management has become the defining performance differentiator this season. The 2026 technical regulations fundamentally changed the power unit formula. The internal combustion engine lost significant capacity, dropping from 1.6 liters to 1.5 liters, and the fuel flow rate was reduced to push manufacturers toward greater thermal efficiency with sustainable fuels. The hybrid system compensated for this power loss by dramatically increasing electrical output. The MG UK now delivers 350 kilowatts, more than double the 120 kilowatts available in the 2025 regulations. That electrical boost is supposed to make up for what the internal combustion engine lost. But there is a critical limitation. The battery capacity was not increased proportionally. The energy storage system still holds approximately 4 megajoules of deployable energy per lap under the current regulations, which means the 350 kilowatt MGUK can theoretically drain the entire battery in just 11.4 seconds of full deployment. On circuits with long straights like Suzuka Monza, or even the high-speed sections of the Miami International Autodrome, that 11.4 seconds disappears fast. The only way to extend deployment duration is through more aggressive energy harvesting. The MGUK can recover energy under braking, and the regulations allow unlimited energy recovery from the rear axle during braking events. But here is where the physics gets complicated. Harvesting energy under braking creates a drag effect on the rear axle. Too much harvesting and the car becomes unstable under braking, the rear end lightens, and the driver loses confidence in the braking zone. Too little harvesting, and the battery does not replenish fast enough to sustain deployment on the next straight. Ferrari's problem across the first 3 races has been that their harvesting strategy errs on the side of driver stability. They are not recovering enough energy under braking to sustain full MGUK deployment across the entire straight. The battery depletes mid-straight, the electrical boost cuts out, and the car loses 50 to 60 km per hour of speed before the next braking zone. Mercedes solved this problem with a more sophisticated energy recovery algorithm that maximizes harvesting without destabilizing the car under braking. Their software adjusts the harvesting rate dynamically based on brake pressure, tire temperature, fuel load, and the specific corner characteristics. The system harvests more aggressively in high-speed braking zones where the aerodynamic load keeps the car stable, and it reduces harvesting in slower, lower-speed corners where rear instability would be more pronounced. The result is a power unit that recovers more energy per lap without compromising driver confidence. Honda's approach with Aston Martin is even more advanced. Their system uses predictive modeling based on the upcoming corner sequence. If the car is approaching a long straight, the system increases harvesting on the previous 2 braking events to ensure the battery is fully charged before the deployment zone. If the car is in a sequence of slower corners with shorter straights, the system reduces harvesting to prioritize mechanical balance. Ferrari's current software does not have that level of sophistication. Their harvesting strategy is more static, applying similar recovery rates across different corner types, without the dynamic adjustment that Mercedes and Honda have implemented. That is what the new algorithms are designed to fix. The Miami software update introduces corner-specific harvesting logic. The system will classify each braking zone on the circuit based on speed, aerodynamic load, and the length of the following straight. It will then apply different harvesting rates to each zone, maximizing recovery where the car can handle it, and reducing recovery where stability is more important. The second element of the update is predictive deployment logic. Instead of deploying the full 350 kilowatts until the battery is empty, the new software will modulate deployment based on the remaining energy in the battery and the length of the straight. If the straight is 800 meters long and the battery only has enough charge for 600 meters of full deployment, the system will reduce output slightly to extend deployment across the full 800 meters. The car will not hit the absolute peak speed it could achieve with full deployment, but it will avoid the cliff-edge depletion that causes the 50 to 60 km per hour speed drop at the end of the straight. The third element is thermal management integration. One of the less discussed aspects of the 2026 power unit regulations is the thermal challenge created by higher electrical output. The MGUK generates significant heat when deploying 350 kilowatts, and the battery generates heat during both charging and discharging cycles. If the battery temperature exceeds the optimal operating window, the power unit control unit automatically reduces charging and deployment rates to protect the cells. Ferrari has been experiencing thermal limitations in hotter conditions, particularly during the China race where ambient temperatures were higher than expected. The new software includes revised thermal management protocols that adjust harvesting and deployment rates based on real-time battery temperature data. If the battery is approaching the upper thermal limit, the system will reduce the deployment rate slightly to allow the cooling system to catch up, preventing the more severe power cuts that occur when the battery exceeds safe operating temperatures. This is a delicate balance because reducing deployment to manage temperature also costs lap time, but it costs less lap time than a complete thermal shutdown, which is what Ferrari experienced during Lewis Hamilton's second stint in Shanghai. Now let's talk about the development process that brought Ferrari to this point. because the timeline is more complicated than it appears. The first indication that Ferrari had an energy management problem came during pre-season testing at Bahrain. The SF26 was fast in short runs, but the telemetry data showed inconsistent electrical deployment patterns across longer runs. The power unit engineers initially believed this was a battery conditioning issue, something that would resolve itself once the cells went through a few full charge-discharge cycles under competitive conditions. Melbourne proved that assumption wrong. Charles Leclerc qualified on the front row, but lost positions on every long straight during the race. The onboard footage showed the same pattern: strong acceleration out of corners, peak speed mid-straight, then visible deceleration before the braking zone. The post-race data analysis revealed the problem was not battery conditioning, it was the harvesting and deployment logic. The SF26 was not recovering enough energy under braking to sustain deployment, and the depletion curve was too steep, draining the battery too quickly once deployment began. Ferrari's response was to form a joint task force between the power unit department in Maranello and the electronics division that handles all the control unit software. That task force included 12 engineers, 4 from the power unit side, 4 from electronics, and 4 from the vehicle dynamics group, who understand how energy deployment affects car balance and tire degradation. Their mandate was simple: find the software solution that closes the gap to Mercedes without waiting for the ADU hardware upgrade that was already in development for mid-season. The task force began by reverse engineering Mercedes' energy management strategy using publicly available telemetry data. Formula One's broadcast graphics now include real-time speed traces, and teams can access this data for competitive analysis. By overlaying Mercedes' speed traces with Ferrari's across identical track sections, the engineers could see exactly where Mercedes was sustaining electrical deployment longer. They identified 4 specific areas where Mercedes had an advantage: entry to long straights, mid-straight deployment sustainability, exit from high-speed corners, and recovery rates under heavy braking. The next step was simulation. Ferrari's power unit simulation facility in Maranello includes a full dyno setup that can replicate race conditions with the actual power unit running at full load. The engineers began testing different harvesting and deployment algorithms on the dyno, measuring battery temperature, charge rates, discharge rates, and thermal behavior across simulated lap profiles from Bahrain, Melbourne, and Shanghai. Each algorithm variant was tested across hundreds of simulated laps to build a statistical model of how the changes would affect performance under race conditions. By the time the team arrived in China, the task force had identified 3 promising algorithm variants. They did not implement any of them in Shanghai because China's circuit characteristics, a mix of medium-speed corners and relatively short straights, did not replicate the conditions where superclipping was most damaging. The decision was made to wait for Suzuka, a high-speed circuit with long straights, to gather more data on the problem before committing to a solution. That is when McLaren changed the equation. McLaren arrived at Suzuka with their own software update, and the performance improvement was immediate. Oscar Piastri led from the start and finished second. Lando Norris was significantly more competitive than he had been in the first 2 races. Ferrari's engineers studied McLaren's telemetry data from Suzuka and realized that McLaren, as a Mercedes customer team, had found a way to optimize the Mercedes power unit's energy management beyond what the factory team was achieving. That was the moment Ferrari's task force moved from exploration to execution. If a customer team could extract that much performance from software optimization, Ferrari as a works team with full control over their power unit architecture should be able to do more. The most revealing detail in the Ferrari software story is not the update itself. It is the language around the timeline. Ferrari sources describe the implementation of new algorithms as the only cause for concern at the power unit level. Specifically, whether the Scuderia will be able to carry it out in time for Miami. That is an unusual admission. Ferrari are not saying the software is coming to Miami. They are saying they are working to ensure it can come to Miami. The distinction matters. Introducing new algorithms to a Formula One power unit is not the same as pushing a software update to a consumer device. The new code must be written, simulated, validated against the data from the first 3 races, tested in the simulator at Maranello, and then verified under real track conditions before it can be trusted in a competitive environment. That final step, real track verification, is where the Monza filming day on April 22nd becomes critical. Hamilton and Leclerc will run the SV26 on one of the most demanding circuits in the world for energy management. Monza's long flat, out straights and minimal heavy braking zones replicate the conditions where super clipping has been most damaging. If the new algorithms perform as designed at Monza, they go to Miami. If they do not, Ferrari faces a difficult decision about whether to race untested software at a sprint weekend that offers only one practice session before the competitive sessions begin. The motor and electronics departments at Maranello are reportedly operating at full intensity to close the gap between where the software is now and where it needs to be by April 22nd. That level of urgency tells you everything about how important this update is to Ferrari's Miami ambitions. Let's break down what happens at Monza on April 22nd, because this filming day is not a standard PR exercise. Under FIA regulations, each team is permitted 2 filming days per season using current specification cars. These days are limited to 100 kilometers of running and must use demonstration tires provided by Pirelli, not race spec compounds. The restrictions are designed to prevent teams from using filming days as additional testing opportunities. But within those constraints, teams can gather valuable data on new components and software. Ferrari has structured their Monza filming day specifically to validate the Miami software update. The 100-kilometer allocation will be split between Hamilton and Leclerc, with each driver completing approximately 50 kilometers, which translates to roughly 9 full laps of Monza per driver. Those 9 laps will be run under controlled conditions designed to test the new algorithms. The first 3 laps for each driver will establish a baseline using the current software. The power unit engineers will collect data on battery state of charge, harvesting rates, deployment duration, and thermal behavior across the lap. Laps 4 through 6 will introduce the new algorithms with conservative parameters. The harvesting rates will be increased slightly, the deployment logic will be adjusted to extend MGUK output, but the thermal management protocols will remain cautious to ensure the system stays within safe operating limits. This phase is about confirming that the new code integrates correctly with the power unit control unit, and that there are no unexpected interactions between the software and the hardware. Laps 7 through 9 will run the full attack version of the algorithms with the same parameters Ferrari intends to use in Miami. Maximum harvesting rates, full predictive deployment logic, and aggressive thermal management protocols. The engineers will be monitoring dozens of sensors across the power unit, battery, and cooling systems, looking for any indication that the algorithms are pushing the hardware beyond safe limits. The key metrics are battery temperature, MGUK temperature, inverter temperature, and the voltage stability of the battery cells under high discharge rates. If any of those metrics exceed safe thresholds, the algorithms will need further refinement before Miami. The Monza circuit is the perfect testing ground for this validation, because it replicates the exact conditions where Ferrari has struggled most. The run from Parabolica through the first chicane is a 1-kilometer straight where the S26 should be deploying full electrical power from corner exit all the way to the braking zone. If the new algorithms work as designed, the car will sustain deployment across that entire straight without the cliff edge depletion that has been costing Ferrari 50 to 60 km per hour at the end of straights in previous races. The data from that single straight will tell Ferrari's engineers whether they have solved the super clipping problem